Once upon a time, I was the life of the party. I had it all: good looks, charm, and a wild lifestyle that would make your head spin. But those days are long gone, and now I'm just a shell of my former self, spending my days drowning my sorrows in cheap booze. It's hard to believe, but I used to be quite the ladies' man back in the 80s. I lived in West Hollywood, where anything went, and I was right in the thick of it all. My name is Daniel, and this is my story. One day I met a strange woman named Emma. She was nothing special to look at, but there was something intriguing about her. After a night of average fun, she dropped a bombshell on me. She asked if I wanted to join a cult. Most people would have run for the hills, but not me. I was always up for an adventure, no matter how crazy it seemed. So there I was, standing outside an old warehouse late at night. Emma knocked on the door, and before I knew it, I was welcomed into a world of excess and pleasure, what I can only describe as a cesspool of degeneracy. Bodies on top of bodies, writhing and moaning, fucking like the end of the world was nigh. What passed as a dance floor was littered with clothes and empty bottles. Cheap perfume intermixed with sweat polluted the stagnant air. The sickeningly sweet concoction made me feel lightheaded. My skull pulsated in tune with the generic synth-pop beat that poured from the speakers, which only partially masked the sound of flesh slapping against flesh. Emma was there too, sandwiched between two jocks and reduced to a babbling, drooling mess. I guessed she'd been holding out on me, or perhaps the unassuming persona was a means of luring people in. It wasn't long until I too got added to the vigorous orgy, courtesy of an eager redhead grabbing me by the crotch. Before I knew it, she had unbuckled my belt and was dragging me down with her. This was like nothing I had ever experienced before. Then, as time went on, I became more and more involved with the cult. I attended their events regularly, indulging in every vice imaginable. But little did I know, there was a price to pay for all the fun and games. I genuinely have no idea how I ended up in the back of that taxi, the driver introducing himself as Bub. After some short conversations, I also know him as the sponsor of the cult. He handed me a contract, offering 10 years of hedonistic pleasure. And what happens after that? I asked with an understandable degree of skepticism. Bob lowering his sunglasses and revealing the pair of unsettlingly blue eyes concealed beneath. I felt cold just looking at them.
The price is firm. Once your membership is up, I get your soul. Simple as that.
I thought that was a joke, but continued asking in suspicion, prompting Bub to amend his offer to 20 years of freedom, contingent upon a simple task: delivering a package. As he handed me a Polaroid of 𝐒𝐈, the door manager at the club, with an address scrawled on the back, Bub assured me it was a straightforward task to seal the deal. To many, the idea of trading their soul for a decade or two of unbridled decadence might seem like a fleeting temptation, but as a dropout facing eviction, it was a lifeline. Since joining the cult, my increasingly hedonistic lifestyle had rendered me unable to hold down jobs, and the bills were piling up. The offer that Bob gave me before seemed too good to pass up. So the very next morning, I did exactly what was asked of me about 𝐒𝐈. Then the payoff was substantial, and soon I was living a life of luxury beyond imagination. From hosting parties on my private yacht with high-class escorts to acquiring casinos and even an island in the Caribbean, I was living the dream. Yet the dream crashed in the early 2000s. From being one of Hollywood's most prominent playboys to a nobody almost overnight. My bank accounts were drained, my property seized. Predictably, my wife left me, taking what little assets remained. Now, I'm surviving on my dead parents' savings and occasional handouts. One day, a package arrived from an unknown sender. It has a gun and a note inside. Dear Daniel, your membership has expired and your payment is way overdue. The House of Exorbitance has been lenient with you thus far, but the time has come to collect. I trust you won't disappoint me. Your friend, Bub. That's Bub. He reminded me of our agreement. My soul in exchange for 20 years of uninhibited pleasure. Now I realized he actually wasn't playing around. Tina was a nice baby. From the time she was born, other moms looked at us with jealousy and longing. She was very calm and quiet. She slept well and didn't fuss when I put her in her crib. Most nights I only had to wake up once to feed her. Every mom and babysitter wished for a baby like her. She was fine with being with other folks and never cried when I wasn't there. Teaching her to use the potty was easy. Tina was the most relaxed baby, little kid, and young girl I've ever known. I might say she's also really clever and pretty, but every mom feels that way about their kids. I would give up everything just to have a healthy daughter. I wouldn't care at all if she was a very upset child, messy with snot, and couldn't poop on her own. Then it happened suddenly, like every bad thing usually does. I was at work when her kindergarten teacher called me. She spoke calmly, in a way only women who spend their day with little kids can. "Hi, Mrs. Davis, how are you?" After some small talk, the teacher spoke again. "Hey, Tina is usually very well behaved, but today she's not feeling great. We checked and she has a fever. Could you come get her now?" I rushed over. When I arrived, Tina could hardly stand. I carried her to the car, not sure if I should take her to the hospital or just give her medicine and put her to bed. Tina had never been sick before. I sighed, wishing I had someone to help me. Wishing Tina's father hadn't left. Back in that day, I was deeply in love with him. My mom lived in another town, but I decided to call her for advice. She told me to let Tina rest for today and take her to the hospital tomorrow if she didn't improve. It seemed obvious, unless you're feeling overwhelmed and tired. As I drove, I started thinking about Ben. He was good-looking and had a way with words, 10 years older than me. I believed we were deeply in love. When he proposed that we have a baby together, I was foolish enough to think it was the greatest commitment a couple could make. I felt special and lucky. Then he got a job offer in Japan and decided I wouldn't like it there. I told Ben I'd be happy anywhere with him, but he said I couldn't leave my job, which I didn't really enjoy, or my mom, who I didn't see much anyway. And just like that, in a week, he was gone. Forever. When Tina and I got back home, I made us tea, ran a bath, and put my daughter in bed. I had a bad feeling, but I figured it was just typical mom worry. That night, I slept beside Tina in a small bed. I couldn't wait until morning to take her to the hospital. She woke up sweaty, shaking, and coughing badly. Her lungs made a strange noise. "It's time for some strong antibiotics," I said to calm myself. When we arrived, Tina had to be put on a tube to help her breathe right away. She could hardly breathe on her own. She looked so tiny and fragile, surrounded by the machines keeping her alive. Over the next few days, things just got worse. Her hair started falling out quickly. She was losing hundreds of strands at a time. Her skin became very dry and looked like it was stuck to her bones, making her appear much older than she was. Her eyes became cloudy and she couldn't see. Her voice was rough and her breath smelled bad. The doctors didn't know what was wrong. We called specialists in infections from other states, even other countries. But nobody knew what was happening. A big effort was made just to keep her alive, but she didn't get any better. I still had to go to work, so my mom came to stay with Tina at the hospital. I spent all my days crying at my desk and searching for rare diseases. I posted on Facebook asking for help. "If you know what's wrong with my daughter, please tell me. I'm desperate." I described all her symptoms. A woman I didn't know contacted me. Her name was Jennifer, and we didn't have any friends in common. She said wanted to discuss about my daughter and her father. According to her, it was really important. Jennifer suggested that we could meet at a coffee shop near a subway station. I quickly said yes, and we met later that day. I didn't have time to worry if it might be a trick. I thought maybe she was an old friend of Ben's who knew about his illness. I felt hopeful. Jennifer was in her mid-30s, a bit older than me. She was tall, pretty, and seemed nice. She was already there when I arrived, and she got me a cappuccino. Then Jennifer explained that she knew what was wrong with my daughter. Although I was skeptical, I agreed to hear her out. She revealed herself to be Ben's ex-wife. She shared shocking details about Ben, claiming he made a deal with the devil and offered their firstborn in exchange for prolonged youth and vitality. I sat in stunned silence as Jennifer recounted her struggles to extract this confession from Ben. Her words painted a chilling picture of his sinister intentions and manipulative nature. Despite my initial skepticism, Jennifer's sincerity and conviction were unmistakable. She also disclosed her suspicions about Ben's obsession with having a child had driven a wedge between them, leading her to uncover his dark secret. We talked a lot, and I'd say we became close friends. After a month, Tina got much better and left the hospital quickly. She's back to her lively self now. There's one small thing I forgot to mention. I went on a trip to Osaka with my new friend. We had a conversation with the man who tried to mess up our lives. Maybe we were a bit too straightforward, if you catch my drift. It was quite an emotional outburst. And cleverness. My life keeps improving. I think Satan was pleased that I sent back something that belonged to him. I heard he's welcoming his irresponsible debtors warmly. I never enjoyed visiting my Aunt Paula's house. Honestly, I never liked her either. She's a creepy Bible-thumping Jesus fanatic, and she'd always circle over me like a vulture. But none of that creeped me out like her house did. It was old, run down, and filled with weird, religious art. But that's not what made my skin crawl. It was the statues. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what bothered me, but something wasn't right about them. They were littered all over the place, filling every corner, turning up in every direction you looked, and I swear they looked back. Giant, god-awful figures of saints and angels clogging the tiny house and turning it into a claustrophobic maze. I often wondered how my aunt could afford all those sculptures. She lived like she'd sworn to be poor, hardly spending any money on herself or her little boy. My cousin Miguel was just as odd as his mom. They looked so much alike that I'd forget he was adopted. Their eyes were the same, with a spooky stare and quietness that made them seem alike. The first time I babysat Miguel, he didn't cry or fuss like most babies. Instead, he just stared at me, which made me uncomfortable. I wondered if it was because he spent so much time with my aunt, who never dated or got married. One Saturday, my aunt asked me to babysit Miguel while she went to Mass. Despite feeling uneasy about her house, I agreed. Inside, religious statues filled the dimly lit rooms. Trying to ignore them, I sat on the couch and flipped through TV channels. Suddenly, Miguel let out a horrifying scream from down the hallway. I rushed to check on him. His cries echoed down the hallway as I entered his darkened room, where I found him standing in his crib, tears streaming down his face. I tried to soothe him with a bottle, but he refused to drink. That's when I noticed the terrifying gargoyle statue lurking in the corner of his room. Sharp, feathered wings stuck out from its back. Its scary face had a nose that jutted out like a parrot's beak over thick lips curved into a wild grin. The bald, odd-shaped head looked small compared to its strong body, with huge hands and arms hanging down past its bent knees. Even though its feet looked like a chicken's claws, it had an overall appearance like an ape. I'd never seen anything like it, but it somehow fit in with the other sculptures in the house. Maybe that's why I didn't run away screaming. While keeping an eye on the scary gargoyle, I rubbed my cousin's back to calm him down. As I rubbed his back, my phone rang, startling me. It was my aunt, asking why Miguel was crying. I explained the situation, mentioning the gargoyle statue, but she denied ever placing it in his room. Suddenly, she whispered urgently, telling me to leave the house immediately. "Marcos, get out now. That statue you saw isn't a statue, it's a demon." I slowly lowered my phone and tried to understand her last words. "It's a demon," I whispered to myself. A shiver ran down my spine when I realized what she meant. I dropped my phone and stumbled backward, hitting the couch. As I moved toward the front door, Miguel's bedroom light suddenly turned off. Miguel stopped crying and hugged my neck tightly with his little cold arms. With his face against mine, we both stared at the dark hallway. His bedroom door creaked open slowly. A deep growl came from the dark hallway, making Miguel scream again. I dashed towards the front door, but all the lights suddenly went out. Heavy footsteps came closer. Something pulled my legs from under me, and I fell to the side. My head hit something hard, but even though I felt dizzy and sick, I held onto Miguel with my good arm and tried to stand up. We took a few steps toward the door when something grabbed Miguel from me. The last thing I remember is hearing someone scream. It might have been me, but I'm not sure. When I woke up, I was in an ambulance on a stretcher. A paramedic said I broke my arm and hit my head hard. I don't remember talking about monsters or trying to move, but when I woke up in the hospital, they had to tie me down to stop me from hurting myself. Doctors and cops asked me questions about what happened. I kept saying a monster, looking like a statue, attacked my cousin and me. They said it was because of my head injury and told me my cousin was taken during the same break-in that hurt me. Someone explained to me with a clipboard that before the attack, I was watching a TV show about monsters and stories. They said the injury messed with my feelings and memories, mixing them up with the crime. What about those statues? I questioned. I was still puzzled. My aunt never had any statues, not of gargoyles or anything else. A nurse walked in to give me a shot through my IV. The last thoughts swirling in my mind were that perhaps some urban legends are real. Maybe a demon can take the form of a statue, and perhaps that house was filled with them. Besides, my aunt is a religious woman. How did she know beforehand that the statue was a demon to warn me? This makes me slightly suspicious about her devotion and what is hiding inside that house.